How does the federal government impact us today?
In America, the federal government is split into three branches: judicial, legislative, and executive. Each has their own duties and responsibilities that they're required to fulfill. In these branches, an important law was passed, the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Dating back to the 1950s, the federal government had not protected African American civil rights. Even though the federal government had granted African Americans basic rights within the 14th and 15th Amendments, the struggle to secure the federal government's protection of these rights continued throughout the century. The causes of this movement were racism, segregation, Jim Crow laws, etc. As a result, the civil rights movement occurred as a range of nonviolent protests to protect African Americans' basic rights.
Male leaders are arguing for, we want political justice, we want voting rights. But what's interesting, and I want to argue that part of the problem is that when you attach human dignity to achieving voting rights, some people want to push back and say that that's slightly problematic, right? Because what happens then when the government takes away your right to vote? Does your human dignity also get erased at that moment? And I think black women in particular have been pushing back this idea of wanting to have more nuance in terms of how we see political justice, how we achieve political justice.
After the Civil Rights Movement, the federal government passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, gender, or national origin. This policy protects our basic rights and the rights of the black community to this day. As minorities, most of the time our rights are not taken seriously and can thus lead to riots to gain back and fortify our rights.
Of legal racial segregation in this country called Jim Crow, and that system fell, right? It was first defeated by the Supreme Court in 1954 with Brown versus the Board of Education. And it was then sort of definitively defeated in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. This legislation was the end of legal segregation in the United States. And I think a lot of people assume, therefore, it was also the beginning of racial integration in the United States.
Connecting this back to the present, our government has several laws and policies protecting our rights as citizens. The Civil Rights Act was made to protect us from instances of discrimination, racism, and segregation regarding federal affairs, and it sees us all equally, looking past religion, gender, and race. How do you think the civil rights movement affected us today?
Well, there has been some positive impacts, such as the desegregation in schools, affirmative action programs that target outreach programs, target recruitment, such as HBCU job fairs for employment and employment support programs. In addition, it's improved in the area of having a voice at the table.
We're building on the shoulders of the movement that came in the past. I think you see a lot of that with Nicole Hannah-Jones' 1619 Project, but have a lot of backlash and pushback from that same project. And I think a lot of that comes from fear.
The Civil Rights Act led to greater social and economic mobility for African Americans across the nation, and it attempted to ban racial discrimination, providing greater access to resources for women and religious minorities.
A few problems the Civil Rights Act has fixed in the past was segregation within schools and in the public. Before, kids and adults who were black weren't allowed to be anywhere near whites. Now, however, black and whites are found together without the hassle of being segregated. However, as we see now, this act is not protecting us as well as it should be. Examples that we have seen today are the Black Lives Matter riots due to the police brutality against blacks. Recently, there have also been attacks against Asians as well. Many other people who do not face the discrimination we minorities face have also stepped in to take a stand for our rights, but we have not yet received the justice that we deserve.
You know, we had Reconstruction. Then we had the Ku Klux Klan, and we had the Black Codes, and we had the Civil Rights Movement, and then we had Reagan, and we had all the backlash to that. We have been in these cycles,
yes,
forever.
Is it 2 steps forward, 1 step back,
yes,
or 1 step forward, 2 steps back?
I think that.
According to Statistica.com, the trend of police shootings has increased significantly. As of October 2021, out of the 716 civilians shot by police, 111 were black. As shown in the chart, in 2019, the number of police shootings was 999, but in 2020, it increased to 1,021, displaying the slow increase of police shootings. The rate of lethal police shootings was also evidently higher among black Americans than any other ethnicities. Police brutality to black Americans has developed into a growing problem in the United States. Do you believe that the Civil Rights Act is all we need to have equality between races, genders, religions, etc.? Why or why not?
Okay, so short answer, no. I do not believe that the Civil Rights Act is all we need to have equality. The Civil Rights Act is a start. However, there must be more policies put in place designed to improve those inequalities.
It's the empathy. You can legislate till the cows come home, but if people's hearts don't change and if they don't start seeing people for humans, then it doesn't matter what the law is.
I don't believe that it's all we need to have equality between races, religions, and genders. There are several white supremacists in the world even today. Unfortunately, many hate crimes happen daily based on religion and race. We hear about religious centers being shot up and people of color being killed, and men are still paid more than women in some fields.
The effectiveness of this policy allows us as people part of the Black community to utilize and make use of the basic rights we are given by the Constitution. The Civil Rights Act was a success, but like most policies, the act had a negative effect on us as well.